My daughter looked me in the eye and said, 90% of your retirement is for my house. Don't forget that. Lauren told me to sit down like it was a family conversation, but the way she stood across from me, arms crossed, eyes sharp, made it clear this was not a discussion, it was a verdict. Ethan stayed by her side, silent at first, watching me the way people watch something they are about to move or use. I lowered myself into the chair slowly, aware that my posture, my breathing, even my silence, were already being judged. Lauren did not ease into it. She did not ask how I was. She did not pretend this was about concern or care. She looked straight into my eyes and said, flat and precise, as if she were reading a contract aloud, 90% of your retirement is for my house. Do not forget that. I felt the words land in my chest without noise, heavy and deliberate, and for a second I wondered if I had misheard her, but her expression did not waver, it hardened. Ethan cleared his throat and joined in with the voice of reason he liked to wear, saying, "What are you holding on to money for anyway? You do not have a future to plan for," then added, almost kindly, "The way you live is old-fashioned. It embarrasses Lauren." Lauren slid a folder across the table toward me, thick and organized, filled with printed spreadsheets and neat columns, down payment, closing costs, kitchen remodel, bathroom upgrades, landscaping, everything already decided. She tapped the page with her finger and said, "You are used to living small, Mom. You will be fine." I flipped through the pages slowly, my hands steady, recognizing the cruel efficiency of it all, how thoroughly my life had been reduced to numbers that served someone else's dream. She told me to sign, not later, not privately, but right there in front of my grandchild, saying it was important for children to learn about family responsibility, as if this were a lesson in love instead of a demonstration of control. I asked one quiet question, the only one that mattered to me. What is my part in this? And Lauren did not hesitate. She did not soften. She said, 10% is enough for you. You are old. What do you need more than that for? And then she delivered the sentence that stripped away the last illusion I was holding on to. You are not a person in this. You are the foundation, and foundations do not get to ask for anything. If you are listening and something inside you is tightening right now, if you recognize the way a room can turn against you without raising its voice, then you understand why moments like this never leave you. And if you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button and let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away, because your support helps bring understanding and love to people who are told they no longer deserve either. Thank you so much, and please keep listening. I did not argue, because arguing assumes you are still being seen as human, and in that moment I understood I was not. Ethan leaned back and crossed his arms, satisfied, as if the matter were settled, while Lauren watched me closely, waiting for tears or resistance, something she could use to paint me as unreasonable. I gave her nothing, not because I was weak, but because I was finally seeing the situation clearly. They were not asking for help. They were assigning me a role, one that required silence and compliance in exchange for being allowed to exist near them. I thought about the way the word retirement had been twisted, how it no longer meant rest or safety but obligation, how my careful planning had been repurposed as entitlement for someone else. Lauren repeated that I should sign, that this was just paperwork, that families did not keep score, and Ethan added that time was sensitive, that deals could fall through, that I should not complicate things now. I looked at my grandchild, sitting quietly, absorbing the lesson being taught without anyone naming it, and I felt a slow, cold clarity settle in. This was not about a house, it was about power, about reminding me that my worth had an expiration date, and that I had reached it. I folded my hands in my lap and stayed silent, and in that silence I felt something shift, not dramatically, not yet, but firmly, like a door closing behind me. They mistook my stillness for agreement, for submission, for the old habit of endurance they had come to expect, and Lauren nodded as if we were done, as if she had claimed what was hers. But as I sat there, listening to them talk over me about timelines and finishes and neighborhoods, I understood something I had never allowed myself to admit before. In that moment, I understood I was no longer a mother to them. I was an asset, and that realization changed everything. Before I became the woman Lauren could speak to like an account balance, I was simply a wife who learned too early that stability can disappear overnight. My husband did not leave in a dramatic way. There was no betrayal or shouting. His body failed him slowly, cruelly, the kind of illness that drains savings and optimism at the same time. By the time he passed, I had learned how to read medical bills the way other people read weather reports, looking for warning signs, preparing for impact. Lauren was still young then, young enough to believe that parents are permanent fixtures, young enough not to understand that when one disappears, the other has to become everything. I did not collapse because there was no room for it. I went back to work, first as an office clerk, then slowly, deliberately, into accounting. Because numbers do not panic, they respond to discipline. I built a life that was quiet, controlled, and predictable, because chaos had already taken enough from us. I learned to live by lists and deadlines, to measure risk, to plan for what could go wrong before it did. And I raised my daughter inside that structure, believing that safety mattered more than softness. I loved Lauren in the way I knew how, by making sure her tuition was paid on time, by sitting in waiting rooms during doctor visits without complaint, by buying her a used car outright so she would never start her adult life in debt. I never asked her to thank me, because love that demands applause does not feel like love to me. It feels like insecurity. I was not the mother who hugged in public or posted long captions online about pride and sacrifice. I did not perform motherhood. I practiced it quietly, consistently, believing that what mattered was what held up over time, not what looked good to strangers. There were moments when I noticed the difference, when I saw how Lauren looked at other mothers who laughed louder, dressed trendier, shared more. And I wondered if my steadiness felt cold to her, but I told myself that understanding would come later, that children often resent the rules that keep them safe. I thought if I stayed firm and reliable, if I never made her worry about money or stability, she would grow into gratitude. What I did not understand then was that my silence was being misread as absence, my restraint as lack of affection, my refusal to dramatize as indifference. When Lauren entered adulthood, she wanted validation expressed in ways I did not speak fluently. She wanted praise that could be displayed, pride that could be seen, and I offered something else entirely, a future that did not collapse when things went wrong. I remember telling myself more than once, usually late at night when the house was quiet, that if she had security, I did not need recognition. That if her life was easier because mine had been harder, that was a fair exchange. I believed, truly, that being the foundation meant you accepted that no one looks at you. They only notice if you fail. That belief followed me into retirement planning as well. I opened my 401k and later my IRA, not because I wanted luxury, but because I was terrified of becoming a burden, because I had seen what illness and dependency do to families, and I promised myself Lauren would never have to choose between caring for me and building her own life. I saved carefully, invested conservatively, lived below my means, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Every contribution was a quiet declaration that I would handle myself, that I would not need rescuing. I never imagined that the very thing meant to protect my independence would later be used to erase it. I did not see the shift happen all at once, but looking back, I recognized the pattern clearly. The more self-sufficient I became, the less Lauren saw me as a person with needs and limits, and the more she saw me as a resource that could be allocated. My discipline, once praised, became something she mocked as outdated. My modesty, once accepted, became an embarrassment. My careful planning, once reassuring, became an opportunity. Somewhere along the way, the story changed in her mind. I was no longer the woman who had carried the weight when no one else could. I was the woman who had money she was not using properly. I had spent my life trying not to take up space, trying not to demand, trying to be the solid ground others could stand on without question, and I did not realize until much later how dangerous that role can be when the people standing on you forget that you are human. The truth is, Lauren did not begin to hate me because I failed her. She began to resent me because I did not perform love in a way that could be displayed and admired. I did not post pictures of her accomplishments online, not because I was not proud, but because pride, to me, was something you carried quietly, not something you advertised. When social media became the language of validation, Lauren noticed my silence and interpreted it as neglect. She once said to me, sharp and wounded, "You never made me feel special." And I remember standing there stunned, thinking of the nights I stayed awake, recalculating budgets so her tuition would clear, of the promotions I turned down because they required travel that would leave her alone. What Lauren wanted was not devotion. It was witnesses. She did not need love that endured. She needed love that could be seen. My love happened in bank statements and medical appointments and paid-off balances, invisible things that did not photograph well. To her, that invisibility felt like rejection. As Lauren's world widened, so did her obsession with how things looked. She began measuring herself against friends whose parents helped with down payments, bought new cars as graduation gifts, posed proudly in family photos that looked effortless and affluent. I watched the envy grow in her, subtle at first, then sharp. My modest clothes, my practical shoes, my refusal to upgrade what still worked, became sources of embarrassment for her. She once invited me to a gathering with her future in-laws and spent days beforehand dropping hints about how I should dress, what I should say, what topics to avoid. I wore something neat and clean, something that felt like me, and the entire night she barely spoke to me. On the drive home, she exploded, saying, "You made me look like I came from nothing," as if my restraint were a stain on her ambition. In her mind, image was inheritance, and I was failing to provide it. Lauren wanted upward momentum, constant and visible, and she began to see me not as someone who had already carried us upward, but as someone who was slowing her climb. She spoke often about status, about neighborhoods, about what it meant to look successful. I listened, and when she asked for help that felt premature, I said no, not because I wanted to withhold, but because I could see risks she refused to acknowledge. The first time she wanted me to co-sign a mortgage, her job history was unstable, her savings thin, and I told her I was not comfortable putting my retirement at risk. She heard that refusal, not as caution, but as betrayal. When the deal fell through, she rewrote the story to protect herself. Her failure became my fault. "If you had helped me," she said, "I would not be stuck." The fact that I had helped her entire life, did not count, because it was not the help she wanted in that moment. The double standard settled in quickly. When her friends received help from their parents, it was called generosity, family values, luck. When I held on to my savings, it was called selfishness. When I lived simply, it was framed as deprivation she had to overcome. When I planned carefully, it was labeled control. She accused me of wanting her to fail so I could feel superior, a sentence that cut deeply because it revealed how she had recast our entire history. "You want me beneath you," she said once, her voice shaking with accusation. "You want to stay on top." I realized then that my independence, the very thing meant to free her from obligation, had become a threat. I did not need her financially. I did not depend on her approval. And because of that, she could not feel powerful or generous toward me. She could not play the role of the good daughter, rescuing a frail mother. My strength denied her that narrative, and she resented me for it. Lauren wanted me diminished, not consciously, not cruelly in her own mind, but functionally. She wanted me small enough to need her, grateful enough to comply, weak enough to validate her importance. My continued competence made her uncomfortable. My refusal to ask for help robbed her of leverage. The more I proved I could stand alone, the more she tried to remind me of my age, my limits, my supposed irrelevance. She spoke often about what would happen when I could no longer manage, planting seeds of inevitability, as if my decline were something she was waiting for. It took me a long time to understand that this was not a concern, it was preparation. What finally became clear to me was that Lauren did not hate me because I was unloving or insufficient. She hated me because I reflected her insecurity back at her. I was proof that stability does not require spectacle, that worth does not depend on applause, that a woman can exist without begging to be seen. In my quiet life, she saw everything she feared becoming, unnoticed, unpraised, unvalidated by the world she was chasing. And instead of questioning that world, she chose to punish the mirror. When I understood that, truly understood it, something inside me settled. Her cruelty stopped feeling personal and started feeling inevitable. She was not trying to destroy me because I was bad. She was trying to destroy the part of herself she could not escape, and I happened to be standing in its place. Ethan did not raise his voice or show his teeth the way Lauren did. His manipulation came wrapped in reason, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who believes numbers make morality optional. He began with phrases that sounded harmless, almost considerate. "We just need you as a co-signer," he said one evening, leaning back in his chair as if this were a favor he was doing me. "You are not really giving us anything. You are just standing there to help the process move." When I did not respond immediately, he smiled and added, "You are not losing control of your money. It stays yours." That word, control, lingered in the air longer than it should have. I noticed how he framed everything as temporary, procedural, painless. He spoke about forms, approvals, timelines, as if the complexity itself were proof of legitimacy. He never said retirement funds at first. He said liquidity. He did not say risk. He said leverage. When I hesitated, he sighed gently and said, "You are overthinking this. That is what you do." Lauren watched me closely during those conversations, her expressions shifting in response to his cues, as if he were translating my resistance into something she could resent. Later, when I was not in the room, he worked on her differently. I heard it in fragments, in sentences that slipped out when she was angry. "Mom keeps money to control you," he told her. "If she wanted you to succeed, she would help you now, not later." He framed my caution as selfishness, my independence as manipulation. The worst thing he said, the thing Lauren repeated to me without realizing how deeply it cut, was, "She is just going to live longer and drain resources anyway." It was said clinically, like a forecast, as if my continued existence were a logistical inconvenience rather than a life. The suggestion of the power of attorney came shortly after that. Ethan introduced it the way someone introduces an umbrella on a cloudy day. "This is just in case," he said. "If you get tired or sick, it helps us handle paperwork for you." He emphasized limited, temporary, reversible. He pointed to the section that restricted it to administrative tasks, banking, communications, nothing dramatic. Lauren nodded along, adding, "It is just so we can help you, Mom. You always say you do not want to be a burden." That sentence was chosen carefully. They knew exactly which fear to press. I agreed to a limited power of attorney because it sounded responsible, because it aligned with the woman I had always been, the one who prepared for worst-case scenarios quietly. I did not imagine it would be treated like a master key. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, small things began to shift. Ethan would mention conversations I did not remember having. Lauren would reference plans I had not agreed to. When I questioned them, they responded in unison, calm and firm. "You already said yes. We went over this. You are mixing things up." That was when the gaslighting began in earnest. Every concern I raised was reframed as confusion. Every boundary I tried to assert was described as emotional instability. Ethan used a softer version of it, tilting his head and saying, "You might be remembering it differently." Lauren was sharper. "You are being sensitive again." They spoke about my age casually, as if it explained everything. "It is normal to forget things at this stage," Ethan said once, not unkindly, which made it worse. I started questioning myself, replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I had missed something, agreed to something I could not recall. That doubt was exactly what they needed. The moment everything changed for me came quietly, without confrontation. I was looking for a utility bill in the study when I opened the wrong folder on the shared computer. Inside were drafts of emails to a mortgage lender, spreadsheets with my name listed as guarantor, and scanned documents that made my stomach tighten. There was my signature, clean and neat, placed on forms I had never seen. The file names were dated weeks earlier. The language used was confident, forward-moving, as if my consent were already settled. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands cold, understanding for the first time that I was not being asked, I was being managed. They had built the plan without me. My role had already been assigned. The limited power of attorney had become a bridge they were crossing without warning me. I scrolled through more files and saw calculations that assumed access to my retirement funds, projections that treated my savings as a given. The calmness with which it was all laid out was more disturbing than anger would have been. There was no hesitation in their planning, no ethical pause, only efficiency. When I confronted them gently, carefully, Ethan did not deny it. He minimized it. "These are just drafts," he said. "This is how professionals prepare," Lauren added. "We did not want to bother you with details." When I pointed at the signature, Ethan shrugged. "You signed the POA. That allows us to move things along." The document allowed limited administrative actions, but they had stretched that limitation until it no longer resembled consent. The document allowed limited administrative actions, but they had stretched that limitation until it no longer resembled consent. I felt the ground shift under me then. This was not a misunderstanding. This was intent. They expected outrage or fear. Instead, I felt something else, a cold clarity that cut through years of self-doubt. I realized that Ethan was not the villain in a simple sense. He was an accelerator. He took Lauren's resentment and gave it structure, legality, and momentum. He turned emotional entitlement into a financial strategy and wrapped it in language that made it sound inevitable. And because I had spent my life avoiding conflict, they assumed I would accept this too. I did not argue further. I nodded, asked a few neutral questions, and went back to my room. They mistook my calm for surrender, just as they always had. But that night, sitting alone, I understood something vital. This was no longer about family tension or misunderstanding. This was about consent, and mine had been taken for granted. The plan they had built depended on one assumption, that I would remain passive. They had not considered what would happen if the foundation they were standing on decided to move. Lauren did not ease into it. She slid the papers across the table the way someone slides a bill after dinner, already assuming payment. The stack was neat, clipped, flagged with yellow tabs, everything prepared as if my role in this moment was simply to comply. She did not ask me to sit. She did not ask how I felt. She said, "We need to finalize this," and tapped the top page with her fingernail. My name was printed there in bold, followed by a signature that looked exactly like mine. For a brief moment, my mind tried to protect me by insisting I must have forgotten signing it, but the tightness in my chest told me the truth before logic could catch up. I had never seen this page before. Lauren leaned back and crossed her arms, watching my face carefully. "Just sign it again so everything is clean," she said, her tone flat, almost bored. "It is just procedure." I traced the signature with my eyes, noting how precise it was, how carefully it had been placed. It was my handwriting, but it was not my consent. Ethan stood near the counter, arms folded, his posture relaxed in a way that felt intentional, as if he wanted me to understand how little leverage I had. "Whether you sign or not," he said calmly, "this has already gone pretty far." I looked up at them then, searching for something familiar in their faces, some flicker of recognition that I was still a person, still Maggie, not a line item. Lauren did not flinch. She said, "You agreed to help us. This is what helping looks like." When I asked how they had my signature, she waved her hand dismissively. "You gave us permission to handle paperwork," she replied. "Do not pretend you do not remember." The room felt smaller with every sentence, as if the walls themselves were closing in on the assumption that my resistance was an inconvenience rather than a boundary. Ethan stepped closer and spoke as if explaining something obvious to a child. "No one is stealing from you," he said. "Your money is still being used for family. This is normal." His voice was steady, reasonable, the kind of tone that makes protest sound irrational by comparison. Lauren nodded along and added, "You always say family comes first. This is you proving that." That was when she said it, the sentence that stripped the situation of all pretense. "You are not the buyer," she said, looking me directly in the eyes. "You are the funding source. Do not play the victim." The words landed heavily, not because they were shouted, but because they were said without hesitation. In that moment, something inside me settled into place with painful clarity. I was no longer being treated as a mother. I was being treated as a resource. I felt a strange calm spread through me, the kind that comes when denial finally exhausts itself. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. Inside, a thought formed quietly and fully. I am no longer a person to them. I am a wallet with legs. That realization hurt more than anger ever could, because it explained everything: the calculations, the assumptions, the impatience with my questions. Lauren was watching for a reaction, for outrage or tears she could dismiss as overreaction. Ethan watched too, measuring whether pressure would break me. Instead, I took a slow breath and placed the papers back on the table, aligning the edges carefully. "I need time," I said, my voice steady. "I will do this properly." Lauren frowned, her patience thinning. "There is nothing to think about," she snapped. "We are on a timeline," Ethan added. "The lender will not wait forever." I met his gaze and repeated myself. "I will handle this through the right channels." The words were simple, but they marked a shift neither of them recognized yet. Lauren scoffed and stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," she said. "We are doing this with or without your drama." I nodded, as if agreeing, because arguing would have fed the version of me they needed to justify their behavior. Ethan gathered the papers and said, "Just remember what you promised." His confidence rested on the belief that I would do what I had always done, absorb discomfort to keep the peace. I walked back to my room without another word. My hands were steady, my steps measured. Once the door was closed, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the moment replay, not to torment myself, but to understand it fully. There was no misunderstanding to resolve, no emotional appeal that would change their minds. This was not about urgency or opportunity. This was about entitlement. They believed my savings were already theirs, and any hesitation on my part was a delay, not a refusal. I opened the drawer where I kept my documents, the same drawer I had organized carefully for years, knowing where everything belonged because preparation had always been my form of safety. I took out statements, account summaries, copies of the power of attorney. I reviewed the language with new eyes, noting every clause, every limit. I felt a flicker of regret, not for trusting them, but for underestimating how easily trust could be reframed as access. As I gathered my paperwork, I did not think about revenge. I thought about protection. I thought about the version of myself who had opened those retirement accounts decades earlier, not to build wealth, but to preserve dignity. That woman had planned for this moment without knowing it. She had built something quiet and solid, something that could still hold even when the people standing on it forgot what it was for. Outside my door, I could hear Lauren's voice rising, her irritation sharp as she recounted the conversation to Ethan, already rewriting it in a way that cast her as patient and me as difficult. I did not interrupt. I had learned that defending myself in that house only reinforced their belief that I was an obstacle to manage. Instead, I placed the documents into a folder and closed it with care. For the first time since this began, I felt a sense of direction. I was not angry enough to make mistakes. I was clear enough to act deliberately. They believed the signature on the page meant the decision had already been made. They believed my silence meant compliance. What they did not understand was that my silence was no longer endurance, it was preparation. I did not confront them the next morning. I did not announce anything. I put on my coat, took the folder I had prepared, and left the house as if I were running an errand, because that was what they expected of me. Quiet compliance disguised as routine. The first office I walked into belonged to Daniel Rothman, an attorney whose name I had saved years ago after a colleague mentioned him in passing, not because I anticipated betrayal, but because I had always believed preparation was a form of self-respect. Daniel listened without interrupting as I laid the papers out on his desk, the scanned signature, the draft lender emails, the power of attorney language I had once agreed to without imagining it would be stretched beyond recognition. He examined everything carefully, his expression tightening, not with surprise but with concern. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and precise. He told me the power of attorney had been used outside its scope, that my signature appeared to have been replicated electronically, and that the documents presented to me exceeded any consent I had given. He said the word misuse plainly, without drama, and for the first time since this began, I felt the weight lift slightly from my chest because someone had named what I was experiencing without minimizing it. From there, I went directly to see Helen Price, the financial advisor who had helped me set up my retirement accounts decades earlier. Helen had watched me plan quietly year after year, adjusting contributions, asking careful questions, always focused on sustainability rather than growth at any cost. When I explained what was happening, she did not gasp or lecture. She nodded, logged into her system, and said, "We are going to slow everything down." She helped me place immediate security holds on my accounts, upgraded authentication requirements, and flagged my profile for in-person verification only. She explained each step clearly, making sure I understood not just what she was doing, but why. As she worked, she reminded me that control over my finances was not something I needed to justify to anyone. That reminder settled into me more deeply than she probably realized. The next call was the hardest, not because it was complicated, but because it marked the point of no return. I contacted the mortgage lender whose name appeared on the draft emails Ethan had so confidently prepared. I told them, calmly and factually, that my identity may have been used without full authorization in an application I had not approved. I did not accuse anyone. I did not dramatize. I did not seek punishment. I sought clarity. I answered their questions as they asked them, providing dates, clarifying what I had and had not agreed to, confirming that I was withdrawing any form of consent to co-sign or guarantee a loan. The representative thanked me for the clarification and told me the file would be flagged for review immediately. The word flag landed with quiet finality. I hung up the phone and sat still for a moment, letting the reality of what I had just done settle. I felt no rush of triumph, no surge of anger. What I felt was steadiness. I had not retaliated. I had not lied. I had simply told the truth to the people who were obligated to respond to it. Whatever happened next would not be because I lashed out, but because systems exist for a reason, and I had finally chosen to use them. Later that afternoon, my phone began to buzz. Lauren called first, her voice tight and controlled in the way it gets when she is trying not to sound alarmed. She said the lender had requested additional verification, that the timeline had suddenly shifted, that there seemed to be some confusion. Ethan's text followed shortly after, shorter, sharper, asking what I had said, who I had spoken to. I did not answer immediately. When I finally did, I kept my reply simple. I told them there was a review in progress and that I was handling it through proper channels. Lauren accused me of sabotaging them. Ethan suggested I was overreacting and putting their future at risk. I read their words without absorbing them, because for the first time, their urgency was no longer my responsibility. That evening, Lauren came to my door, her composure cracked enough to let fear show through. She asked me why I would do this to her, why I would choose bureaucracy over family. I looked at her and answered honestly, without raising my voice. I told her I had not done anything to her. I had protected myself. When she demanded to know if I had reported them, if I had accused them of fraud, I shook my head. I did not accuse anyone, I said. I answered questions. I did not seek punishment. I sought clarity. She stared at me, as if trying to locate the loophole she had missed, the angle she could still exploit. Ethan joined her then, his confidence gone, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to regain control of the narrative. He asked if I understood what this delay could cost them, if I realized how close they had been to approval. I listened and then said the sentence that ended the conversation. I did not file a complaint, I said. I did not make threats. I told the truth when they asked. The room went quiet, not because they accepted it, but because there was nothing left to argue against. That night, as I sat alone with my documents finally back under my control, I understood the full shape of the twist they never anticipated. They believed my signature was the finish line. They never considered that the same systems designed to process their advantage could also protect my autonomy. I had signed nothing new. I had agreed to nothing further, yet everything had changed. The process they tried to rush had turned inward, locking them out not because I sought punishment, but because I refused to be used. In choosing to speak plainly to the right people, I had closed the door they assumed was already open, and I did it without raising my voice, without calling it revenge, without becoming the villain they expected. Lauren did not knock this time. She burst into my room as if fear had stripped her of manners, her face flushed, eyes wild, phone clenched in her hand like evidence. She was crying and yelling at the same time, the words tumbling over each other, without order. She said I had ruined everything, that the lender had frozen the file, that the sellers were threatening to walk, that the clock was ticking, and it was all my fault. "You destroyed my life," she screamed, pointing at me as if blame were a physical object she could shove into my chest. I watched her carefully, noting how every sentence circled back to the deal, the timeline, the money. Not once did she ask if I was all right. Not once did she ask why I felt cornered enough to protect myself. Her grief was not for a relationship, it was for a purchase slipping out of reach. Ethan arrived a moment later, his energy different, sharp and contained, the way it gets when he is calculating rather than persuading. He did not look at me at first. He looked at Lauren and said, "You told me she would sign." The sentence landed like a match on dry paper. Lauren spun toward him, stunned. "Do not put this on me," she snapped. "You said you handled the paperwork." Ethan shot back that he had handled what he could, that he relied on what Lauren promised, that she was the one who insisted I was a sure thing. The shift was immediate and brutal. Where there had once been unity in pressure, there was now separation in blame. They spoke over each other, voices rising, each trying to step out from under the consequences by shoving the weight onto the other. As they argued, details spilled out that had never been meant for me to hear. Ethan complained about the embarrassment, about how his colleagues would find out they had been flagged, about what it did to his image. Lauren fired back that she had always known he cared more about appearances than people. He countered that she was the one obsessed with status, with proving she had climbed higher than where she came from. The word came out sharp, cutting, and she flinched because it struck something true. They were not fighting about love or trust or family. They were fighting about alone, about pride, about whose reputation would take the hit now that the easy money was gone. Lauren turned back to me then, her voice changing mid-sentence into something softer, almost pleading. She said I was her mother, that mother's sacrifice, that I had always been strong, that this was just a rough patch and family pulled together. But even in that appeal, the language was transactional. She spoke about solutions, about temporary fixes, about how I could still help if I wanted to. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge the way she had spoken to me, the way she had reduced me to percentages and foundations. She simply changed tactics, hoping familiarity would succeed where force had failed. I listened until she ran out of words. Then I spoke calmly, because calm was no longer something I used to keep the peace. It was something I owned. "I did not take your future," I said evenly. "I stopped financing your contempt." The room went quiet, not because they agreed, but because the sentence left no opening for argument. Ethan scoffed and said I was being dramatic, that this was about money, not feelings. I met his eyes and replied, "Exactly." The truth of that seemed to hit him harder than accusation would have. Lauren collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking, the fight draining out of her now that there was nothing left to extract. She asked what she was supposed to do. The question was new, and it startled her, because for the first time it was not directed at my resources. It was directed at reality. I did not offer solutions. I did not step in to rescue her from the consequences of plans made without respect. "You will do what adults do," I said. "You will adjust." Ethan bristled at that, muttering about unfairness, about how this never would have happened if I had just signed like I always did. He stopped when I looked at him and said, "You built your plan on my silence. That was your mistake." They argued again. Lower now, sharper, the kind of argument that leaves marks even when it ends. Ethan accused Lauren of mishandling me, of pushing too hard, of assuming control she did not have. Lauren shot back that he had encouraged it, that he had spoken about me like an asset from the beginning. Each accusation peeled back another layer of the partnership they had presented as solid. Without money to unite them, there was little left to hold on to. I stood and gathered my bag, not because I was fleeing, but because there was nothing left for me in that room. Lauren looked up as I moved toward the door, something like panic crossing her face. "You cannot just walk away," she said. "You are my mother." I stopped and turned to her fully, not angry, not cruel, just honest. "I am your mother," I said. "That does not mean I am your bank." The distinction seemed to break something open in her, because for the first time she saw that the role she had assigned me was no longer available. Control requires access, and she had lost it. As I left the room, their voices rose again behind me, not calling me back, but circling each other, looking for someone else to blame now that I was no longer absorbing it. I felt no satisfaction in their unraveling, only a sober recognition that this was always where it would lead once the money stopped masking the truth. Lauren had lost more than a down payment that day. She had lost the illusion that I existed to be managed, and I had gained something far more valuable than approval. I had reclaimed the right to stand apart, no longer as a foundation under someone else's house, but as a person whose boundaries finally held. I did not leave in a rush. That surprised even me. After everything that had been said and done, I expected anger to push me forward. But what guided me instead was order. I revoked the power of attorney formally, in writing, with witnesses, the same way I had handled every serious decision in my life. My retirement accounts were locked down with in-person verification only. No digital shortcuts, no third-party access, no assumptions. I met with my advisor one last time to review everything, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted clarity. For the first time in years, my future was quiet. No one was reaching into it. No one was standing over it with a calculator. I packed my things slowly, choosing what mattered and leaving behind what never truly belonged to me. There was no drama in it, just the steady understanding that a chapter had ended the moment my dignity became negotiable. I moved into a small apartment at Silverbrook Senior Community, a place that did not ask me who I was related to or what I could provide. They asked what I liked to read, whether I preferred mornings or evenings, how I took my coffee. It felt strange, being seen without being measured. The apartment was modest, clean, and warm, and when I locked the door behind me the first night, the silence felt earned rather than imposed. I redirected part of my savings quietly, deliberately, a donation to an organization that helps protect seniors from financial exploitation, another to a small scholarship fund for women returning to school later in life. I did not announce it. I did not need recognition. Giving felt different now that it was a choice rather than an expectation. It felt lighter. I slept better than I had in years. Lauren called a week later. Her voice was careful, softer than I remembered, threaded with something that sounded like regret but never quite reached apology. She said she wanted to talk, to clear the air, to figure out a way forward. She spoke about misunderstandings, about stress, about how money complicates everything. I listened without interrupting, because I had learned the difference between being heard and being used. When she paused, I asked one question. "What do you want from me now?" The silence that followed told me more than her words ever had. She spoke again, vaguely, about solutions, about flexibility, about how families find compromises. The center of gravity never moved away from the same place. "I am not a foundation for your house," I said gently. "I need a roof of my own." She cried then, not loudly, but in short, frustrated bursts, as if the tears themselves were inconvenient. I did not comfort her. I did not argue. I told her I loved her and that I would not discuss money again. The call ended without resolution, but it did not leave me shaking. I had learned that peace does not require agreement, only boundaries that hold. Life settled into a rhythm that belonged to me. Mornings with a book, afternoons walking the garden paths at Silverbrook, talking with people who did not know my history and did not need it. Evenings without dread. I was not lonely. I was intact. Occasionally, news filtered back to me through distant relatives. The house deal had collapsed. The marriage strained under pressure that no longer had an external target. I did not celebrate that. Consequences do not need an audience. One afternoon, months later, Lauren sent a message asking to meet. No mention of money this time, just a request. I did not answer immediately. I thought about it, not out of fear, but out of respect for myself. I eventually replied that I was open to seeing her, but not to revisiting the past or renegotiating my future. The reply came back quickly, a simple acknowledgement. Whether it would last, I did not know. What mattered was that I no longer needed to decide for both of us. Standing in my kitchen one evening, watching the light fade beyond my window, I thought back to the sentence that had started everything. 90%. A number delivered like a verdict. Lauren had forgotten one thing when she said it. I had already retired from the role she assigned me. I had stopped being a wallet with legs long before she noticed. I did not walk away angry. I walked away. Finished sacrificing peace for approval. Finished mistaking endurance for love. When my daughter told me my retirement belonged to her house, she assumed I would do what I always had. She forgot that I had spent a lifetime preparing for the day I would finally choose myself. Before you go, let me say this from the quiet place these stories come from. I did not tell this story to be pitied, and I did not tell it to shame my child. I told it because there are many women sitting in silence right now, believing endurance is the same thing as love, believing that being useful is the same thing as being valued. It is not. If this story felt familiar, if it stirred something you have been carrying without words, then it has already done its work. If you want to hear more true stories like this, stories spoken at last by women who were quiet for too long, I invite you to subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support helps these voices reach others who need to hear that it is never too late to reclaim dignity, to draw boundaries, and to choose yourself without apology. Remember this, whether you are a mother, a daughter, or someone standing somewhere in between. Love that requires your erasure is not love. Wisdom does not shout, but it remembers. And when a grandmother finally speaks, the world listens. Thank you for listening.